Hi everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar, Mapping in Middle-earth. This webinar is part of our customer webinar series, Talk Data to Me, which is aimed to provide tips, tricks, and how-tos to make you a smarter Tableau customer. My name is Megan Fay, and I'm part of the marketing team here at Tableau. I'll be your moderator. Just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. All lines are currently muted. If you have a question, please use the Q&A window. We'll answer questions at the end of the webinar if time allows. And a recording of this webinar and a copy of the workbook will be emailed out after the webinar. So if you miss something, don't fret. You'll be able to reference it afterwards. With that, I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Amy Metkiewicz. Amy is a senior product consultant and will be discussing various tips on mapping in Tableau. If you have geographic data, you are in the right place. All right, let's get started. Amy, take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining me this morning. So let's dive right in. I have quite a bit of content to cover today, so buckle your seatbelts, everyone. It's going to be a packed session. And really, I want to go through a few different things. I'll be working primarily today in Tableau Desktop, but I will do a slight preview of what it might look like to interact with visualizations in our hosted Tableau Online platform. And Tableau Desktop, if you're not familiar already, is where you author, create, and build powerful visualizations. We'll talk a little bit about data sources and how you need to develop them to bring in that mapping information and go through some examples along the way. So with that, I'm going to open up my Tableau Desktop workbook and talk about some different items we'll go over today. So I want to cover just some simple out-of-the-box mapping capabilities. If you're tremendously new to Tableau, this will be very helpful, or even just new to mapping your geographic data. We'll go over some things that you'll be able to take away. And if you're more comfortable with some advanced mapping in, say, other softwares like Esri's platforms that you can leverage, like ArcGIS, or you're doing some remote sensing analysis, we can kind of talk to different ways of bringing in some of that information to plot in Tableau and what's the best use case for bringing in that information, as well as just some tips and tricks, and we'll go over some resources that you can leverage that our partners have created and just some of our own Tableau gurus. So I'm very excited to share my knowledge with you all today. So we'll just start. So I'm just in Tableau Desktop sharing some PowerPoint slides, but essentially we're just going to go over some basic capabilities. So using Tableau's built-in geocoding to display information in a map. And as you can see in the corner there, that includes area codes, MSA, CBSA, boundaries, cities, congressional districts, counties and regions, countries, states, zip codes, so on and so forth. One thing to note is we do have a wonderful KB article that will outline all of the specifics regarding each one of these kind of subtopics. So I just kind of put the link here, but it's essentially if you just go and Google Tableau mapping basics, you should get a web-based article that's going to look very similar to this item here, where we're looking at the area code information. Okay, that's U.S. telephone area codes. What do the MSA boundaries speak to? Okay, that's U.S. core-based statistical areas. Worldwide cities with 15,000 or more, the names in which we interpret those cities, so on and so forth, down all of the different out-of-the-box functionality that you would see. So I really encourage you to leverage this, especially if you're like, oh, why aren't some of my zip codes populating, or what are some, what are the kind of walls that I could encounter when using Tableau's out-of-the-box mapping functionality. So with that, I'm going to go through and map a little bit for you and kind of talk through some of these different roles that we have here and some best practices about creating those visualizations. And then we'll get into some of the more advanced features, talking about data source development and dashboard creation examples that are really going to be able to inspire you when you leave this session. So with that, I simply already have a map created, but we'll actually go through how this is done. The data source that we're using just has very, very basic information in the sense of city, country, I think there'll be some postal codes in here as well, but there is no latitude and longitude coming in from the data source side of what we have here. You can see that Tableau has generated latitude and longitude based on identifying the different geographic items that came in this data source. That's what this globe item will be. And if you have string information, string fields that are coming in, and you want to, at any point, assign them a geographic role that wasn't innately picked up by Tableau when importing your data, you can always right-click on that field name and assign it the appropriate geographic role. Maybe it's kind of an obscure, maybe it just says location IDs or something of that nature, but that's really your postal code. The chances that Tableau picks up location ID as a zip code is not so on point. If you're using things like postal code, zip code in the actual field name, it should automatically pick it up. If not, this is going to be your best way to assign those roles. So with that, let's go through leveraging this. Once you've actually had the geographic roles assigned appropriately, I'm going to go ahead and clear this sheet. And building visualizations in Tableau, if you haven't already, is tremendously easy and natural. So here I can just double-click on state. And Tableau has brought up both the country field and the state field. And the idea around that is if we were to remove the country field, you'll see it'll default to the country in which I'm located in. So I'm based out of the United States. Tableau recognizes that and has that information. Therefore, we'll put it in this more default view. And the idea behind this is that there are, and you can see down below, there's 1,000 unknowns. So Tableau doesn't know what country to pair all of these different states with and how to identify them in the visualization. So having information that you can pair together to build and place the correct locations on the globe is essential. But if you were to even come in and click on the unknowns item, and go in and actually edit the locations. So that was just by simply clicking on the bottom icon there. You can come in and say, okay, well, these items were just innately unrecognized. They may just be outside of the items that we geocode, but you can always right-click and actually start typing in a certain latitude that is associated with that location. All right, so just keeping that in your back pocket as well. Maybe it's only 3 or 4 areas that didn't populate, and you can just come in here and add that information manually, but just having that there, it's a really quick way to get those items to plot. And with that, when we're looking at state, country, MSA boundary, I want to say potentially even area code, it's slipping my mind. We can also create filled maps. So right now the automatic is the circle icon, just the points themselves. But if we were to go into the drop down here, we can actually create a filled map. And that's going to fill the boundary of the state that we have sold product in this particular case. And the idea around this is you can start adding other items to the view. So what are the total sales, or maybe even coming into the drop-down and changing that sum of sales to maybe an average sales. And using this as a way to inform your end users and to give them really power and insight right away. So maybe even say, okay, well, if we put profit onto color instead, what does that look like? And really informing your end users with these visualizations. And the maps, you know, I don't usually encourage them to be used in isolation, and we'll go over dashboard creation as well. But just keeping in mind that the power of Tableau is the idea that you create visualizations, these sheets of sorts, and then put them together in a dashboard to add interactivity and discovery of your data. So just keep that in mind, and as we move through, so thinking about, you know, you want to focus on mapping information for sure. I think it adds tremendous value to dashboards, but also really making sure that those maps are going to help the end users drive to other insights based on the spatial relationships that they have identified in the visualizations. So with that, I'm going to change gears and let's talk about a little bit more advanced functionality. So we just spoke to that simple, what will Tableau pick up? How do we learn more about what it will identify? And gone through creating just a simple example. But let's change gears and talk about more advanced mapping, where you as a data analyst are actually collecting, or the company, excuse me, are collecting information, locational information in the sense of latitude and longitudes from either your clients or different structures that you have on the globe, or movement of items in your company, may be distributing items, just general transport. So let's change gears and talk to that. So I'm going to go through a simple example of each, starting first with points. When we're thinking about unique locations on the globe that we want to plot. These locations may be street addresses. So Tableau at this current stage does not out of the box map street addresses. And you could think that the database that would ship with the product that would hold street address level information would be quite large and would really bog down a lot of systems for people who weren't even using that geographic information. But if you are collecting the information, maybe customer location, cell tower location, well location, let's think of some other things. Maybe you're tracking habitat, so certain habitat locations, just that unique point where you identified, or maybe a field site, something of that nature. So we're going to speak to when those pieces of information come from the data source, how can we bring them out in Tableau? So I'll just speak to a simple example where we're looking at unique farmers markets in Massachusetts. And I actually got this data source off of Massachusetts state website, their GIS portion of their website, and transformed the shape file to be read by Tableau, and we'll speak to that as well today. But essentially, we have a row of data. We have an ID that's describing the market, the general location or name of that market, so a farmer's market. And then each row has a latitude and longitude associated with that farmer's market. So this is the actual data that we're looking at. And let's look at what that is in Tableau. So pretty easy. It looks very similar to the other visualizations. There's nothing really obscure that we're seeing. It's rendering on the same map background that we were seeing before. And still looks like we just have general latitude and longitude and some level of granularity that we're viewing that data at. So let's talk a little bit about it. So the latitude and longitude, it is no longer generated. It's actually a non-italicized field, and it has been picked up as a geographic field, but as we were saying before, that is not the case. You want to make sure that your latitude and longitudes are being read as integers or numeric values, so float or integer, and you can assign them that latitude and longitude association to inform Tableau that this is how you should read this information on the view. And with that, you can simply just drag and drop these onto the visualization. And right now we're looking at an average, right? So we're averaging our latitude and longitude. So that's averaging all of the rows in our data source at looking at the locations of our farmers markets. So by bringing out our market ID, which is our row level identifier, we can identify all of the different farmers markets in Massachusetts. Maybe looking at certain pieces of information, so type, are they winter or are they all year round farmers markets? And being able to identify that and driving insight as well as, locational association that you brought in from your own data source. So we've hit about 15 minutes, so I'm just going to continue moving forward. We should be good on covering all of the content today, so that's very exciting. I have quite a bit. So now we just talked about bringing in simple points, but another very common thing is, well, what if I want to track the movement of items over the globe? Right? So no longer are we looking at points in isolation, but the movement and the lines or connections of data across the globe. So let's speak a little bit to how paths and those data sources are created and developed. So once again, we're still thinking that, okay, the latitude and longitude is being stored in the data source itself, And we're going to leverage different mark types. So instead of using the circles, we'll be using the line mark type. And essentially all we're going to do is take that same idea where we have I work in Fremont, I live in Ballard, and I'm meeting a friend for dinner in Greenwood. So this is just kind of a conceptual example of, there's a logical progression to how these points should be mapped, and therefore we want to make sure that's identified in the data source. We can think of this as, connecting the dots. We want to inform Tableau how to connect those dots. So we'll first start at Tableau. I will go home, and then I will meet my friend at a restaurant later in the evening, all right? So let's map this particular data source. So this is a data source that I generated on my own, and see how we can bring that into Tableau and actually view it. So we'll just open up my example, and like I was saying before, right, so we're looking at the exact same data source, but now instead of just seeing a Google Maps snapshot, we're actually seeing it in Tableau. So I'll clear out the sheet and kind of start from scratch. So my latitude and longitude have been identified. So I'll bring my longitude onto columns, latitude onto rows. I'll start to get that general view of that average location. My locations themselves is the description of if it's Tableau, home, or a restaurant. I can bring that onto detail just to break apart that information. Then from there, no longer do we want to just see these unique points, but we want to connect the points. So I'm going to go and change the mark type from this automatic circle to a line. And by doing so, Tableau is actually going to connect the dots from left to right. Okay, so that's just the default connecting the dots, how it's going to end up working. So if that's how all of your lines are connected in all of your data sources, right? Okay, you don't need a identification of how those dots would be collected, but in 99% of the cases, you're going to want to bring in a field that's actually telling Tableau explicitly how to connect those dots. Okay, so I have my path field, which we had seen here before, which is the 1, 2, 3. And I'll bring path onto path. And let's make sure, there we are. And we can now see that we've been able to connect the dots in the appropriate way. So let's go through one more example of this, just to kind of plant the seed in really a slightly less intensive way to build the data source, and just a common thought process of building out this type of visualization is the classic storm view that we use at Tableau when we're looking at the travel or the movement of storms across the globe over, I think it's about 2 years of time. And here, when we're looking at this visualization, we have the longitude and the latitude, right? Okay, that makes sense. It's all well and good. We're breaking it up by storm, right? The actual storm itself. But you can see that the field that's actually connecting those points is a date. So when we're thinking about, if you're tracking maybe taxi movement or shipments across time, and you have those locational waypoints and a timestamp that's associated, you can bring that into Tableau and actually map it on the globe, right? So just planting that seed of a very common use case where you haven't really been able to map the information, but all of the pieces that you need are really at your fingertips, and just using Tableau to bring it out onto the view. Right? So with that, let's continue to move forward, and I'm going to actually kind of navigate you to some resources to continue evolving your knowledge and becoming more educated on these different techniques as well. So stand attentive as we continue to move forward here. So we're going to go and kind of add that last layer of dimensionality. So we've gone through points. We've gone through actually creating lines. Well, what about closed regions or closed shapes, polygons on the globe? So let's talk through that. What I have here is, just a slide that's kind of talking about, okay, well, we're bringing this information, this latitude and longitude from our data source. And it's the same concept. We're connecting the dots. We need to tell Tableau how to connect those points. right? So 2 neighborhoods we'll be creating here is Ballard and Fremont. And we have a field that says, okay, what's the polygon ID or the name of the neighborhood? What is the order of connecting these points for each unique polygon? And what are the unique latitude and longitudes for each one of those points on the polygon shape? And it's a very similar concept to creating the lines, except we're closing that boundary. So I'll just go and open up my example. And let's start from scratch here. So I'll bring my longitude and my latitude. It will give me that average across all of the points in my data source. I'm going to break that out by polygon ID. So here we have Old Ballard, and in this general area we have Fremont. I'm going to go and actually say, okay, well, I want these to actually be our polygon mark type. And let's actually go in and add that path to the view as well. So the path is then breaking out that granularity to look at all of those unique locations on the entities themselves. All right? And the screen had gone blank when I first had done polygon because you can't make a closed entity with just 2 points on the map. So just keeping that in mind. So with this, let's kind of talk about how important it is to have the identifier of these polygons as well. So I'm just going to show this quick filter and being able to toggle between the different icons here. So looking at, okay, all of the 2 different entities, looking at just Fremont and just Ballard. So when I go back out to the all and actually remove my polygon ID from the visualization, we'll see that it's going to be going kind of that left to right, or I guess clockwise connections of the points, considering we haven't broken out the visualization into further detail identifying the 2 different polygons, right? But if we were to toggle and just look at Fremont or just Ballard, we'll have that identification. So just being very cognizant of identifying those shapes and having that on the visualization as well. So with that, we have about 7 minutes left, and I'm just going to kind of talk through some really strong examples. So the title of Mapping in Middle Earth is actually speaking to background images, and this is actually a public example that one of my coworkers made for an internal certification. But essentially, if you wanted to bring in a visual, bring in data on a Cartesian coordinate system to just kind of the XY plane and plot it on a image, in this case Middle Earth, how could that be done and what would it look like? So we have great knowledge base articles on this. I won't have time to go through in detail, but I just wanted to speak through, that is a possibility, maybe a stadium or a campus, a hospital, a floor plan where you want to plot data to track, flow or capacity. That's something that you can do in Tableau as well. So I just wanted to speak to that. But let's change gears and talk more about, not just the creation of these visualizations, but how do you use them and really put them to, like what I was speaking to in the beginning of the session, not looking at these maps in isolation, but making sure that they are used within visualizations to drive insight and to drive really data discovery. So I'm just going to open up, this is a visualization that I took off of our public website. And we actually have all of these different custom shapes or custom polygons that are speaking to the river basins in the UK. And we can click on certain areas and say, where are the flood warning areas? And being able to drill into, where are those high flood warning areas? Being able to ask those questions, see where you live, and actually hover over and say, okay, well, what are the most common problems that have happened? Why should I be concerned? And if I'm purchasing a home, per se, or you are doing any type of development, why should I be, nervous or concerned about that particular information? And kind of being able to go in and drill and to look at all of these different basins, click on it and actually see the whole entity that is that basin. And I think, just driving that insight, right? So being able to identify certain areas, use the map, and then having those actual those tooltips give you that much more information that you need to be successful. So I am going to change gears again with the last 4 minutes and talk about some resources that you can leverage. So I'm just going to open up a web browser and thinking about, okay, well, you've created these really powerful visualizations, but how can I share them with my company, my community, and really ensure that people are going to be successful, and if they don't have the desktop client, that they can still ask questions of their data and be informed about the company and the spatial patterns that are associated. So we're going to talk a little bit about Tableau on the Line, which is our hosted platform for sharing and consuming visualizations. The on-premise version is Tableau Server. The interface is identical, and you can experience the same way as an end user. So this is kind of a fun example that I encountered through my time, and it's actually David Bowie's tour history. So we're looking at that past example, being able to actually use this lower visualization to drill into certain certain kind of, movement of David Bowie throughout the globe, and his actual concerts that he played. So he played 4 times in Philadelphia in that, wow, that's a lot of months. So March through September of 1990. And all the different areas that he had played. And then kind of drilling back out and seeing that whole entire, travel that he has made, looking at, okay, overall he's played the most in London, New York City, and Los Angeles. Those are the top 3 cities that he most often played in, and actually being able to, look and interact with his visualizations if you wanted to kind of drill into how many stops a certain tour made. All right, so thinking about this in whatever use case is beneficial for your company, but the idea that someone can come into a web browser and ask questions of the data that is from a visualization that has already been authored by some champions or some power users that have that particular skill set. With the last 2 minutes, I'm going to speak to a few other things. So if you have shapefiles and you have an ArcGIS license, we have a KB article that will walk you through how you can bring that into Tableau. Okay. If you do not have an ArcGIS license and you pull down a shapefile, which is really just a geographic file type that will hold that polygon-like structure, the line structure, or the points, and how you can bring that into Tableau. So a lot of times there are free files you can download. So that Massachusetts farmers market file was something that I pulled down from the Massachusetts GIS website. So if you don't have an ArcGIS license, but you have a shapefile, there's also a Ultrix gallery tool. One of our partners is Ultrix, and Craig Bloodworth, who is from another partner group, the Information Lab, created this amazing web module, I suppose you would call it. You just need to make a free gallery account. There's no payment or fees associated with using this, and it's tremendously beneficial. I can even, let's see if I can, I'll put this in the chat, and I'll just send this out to all participants, as well as this knowledge article here. So that should appear in the chat. And speaking to let's see, say you don't have shapefiles, but you have information that you want to play around and plot. One thing that there is that you can leverage is the drawing tool for Tableau that's from our Power Tools. I would highly encourage you checking it out if you're interested in also plotting on an image. So when I was talking to that image plotting, that's tremendously beneficial to make it really easy to create that data source. So play around with that. I highly encourage it. And 2 other notes. This month on Tableau Public, if you check out the blog, it's mapping month. So look at the articles. There's some. That's actually where I got the UK example. I thought that was a really amazing example. But some really awesome best practices and just playing around. It's our free sharing platform for bloggers or just individuals that are really passionate about data analytics so they can come and post their visualizations here. So with one final note here, I'll even put this in the chat as well. Online training. So if you want to learn more and you've become, I planted the seed of excitement, come to our advanced mapping live training. I actually created the training and it goes over these exact same items and housekeeping notes that we went over today. It's robust and more talking about WMS servers and Mapbox integration. I didn't have enough time to speak to all of those things, but they're very powerful tools that you can leverage through Tableau to map your information. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Megan, and if we have any questions that came through, we can leverage them there, or we can close down the webinar. Thank you so much for joining and listening in.
Thanks, Amy. Great presentation. We have just a couple questions, and I know we are over time, so if you have to drop, that's fine. But I do want to get these two questions answered. For the farmer's market shapefile, were you importing the actual shapefile or copying the data from the shapefile attribute table?
Yeah, so I was actually used the Alteryx gallery tool. If you wanted to export the attribute table, that would be in another way that you could go about doing that as well. It's just whatever is easier. So when you're just looking at the point locations, exporting the attribute table will be beneficial. But when you're looking more at advanced creation of, say, paths on the globes or polygons, you'll have to leverage one of these two avenues to ensure that the information is going to appropriately render. And the idea around that is that Tableau cannot natively consume shapefiles, but we are making very big strides to, in the future, support that type of functionality.
Great. Thanks for answering that. And then the last question is, will we ever be able to show maps with multiple WMS servers or a map with Tableau base map merged with a WMS layer?
That is a great question, and it's a very good question. The best way that you can do it now in the current platform, so it's unless you're creating your own WMS and merging on the back end, you've probably already come to find that that's not possible, right? But if you're using Mapbox integration, it's a free, you can use the free Mapbox Studio. And you can actually come in and overlay certain shapefiles, KMLs, things of that nature onto more of a customized background that you can either leverage some of their pre-built backgrounds and start making your own pretty much custom WMS layers without having to start from scratch. Just being able to add things that are essential to your community to answer those questions. So we're not exactly where you hope we are in the sense of, just simply overlaying the Tableau maps of the WMS, but we've been able to now leverage Mapbox to do that exact same functionality. So I highly encourage you to check out some of our articles around that.
Sweet. Well, we are over time today, so I'm going to wrap things up. I'd like to thank Amy for her presentation and thank all of you for joining. We will be sending out an email in the next couple of days with all these resources that Amy has mentioned, the workbook that she was working off of, and this recording. We hope you can apply all these mapping tips in your day-to-day work. And with that, have a great day.